Welcome back to the show. Garen Emig, Eli Letterman, here to talk about the Oklahoma State Cowboys in the week that was, all things related to Stillwater. We want to thank you for watching and certainly thank you for downloading the audio version podcast-wise. That's something available via Google, Apple, and Spotify. Appreciate it sincerely, your attention and your continued patronage. All right, Eli. You had an interesting basketball week in that you made the trip to Allen Fieldhouse for a Monday night game between the Cowboys and the Jayhawks. The product on the floor is more of the same, right? It's win one, lose one. It's been the pattern, I think, pretty much throughout February from Boynton's team. You get the feeling they're just trying to reach a finish line now with 5 games left. Some of the stuff maybe that had less to do with the game itself, I thought was more interesting, including a takeaway story that you brought back about the Thompsons and the adjustment Bryce has made from Kansas, the 1 year he was there with KU, to Oklahoma State. So why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah, it's my first trip to Allen Fieldhouse, so I was just taking in all the sights, but I'd been in touch with Rod Thompson, Bryce's dad, all day. Just on kind of Bryce's return and all that. And when the Thompsons rolled in, they walked right in and they were sitting just behind the Oklahoma State bench. I spent a little time with them pregame, watched Bryce go through his warm-ups, was watching them as Bryce got booed during pregame introductions. He's at the foul line and the fans are chanting "traitor" at Bryce Thompson. And so I sort of got to see that night a little bit through the lens of the Thompsons. And it was pretty interesting. You know, Bryce was there for a year. It was a COVID year, so I don't think they'd even ever seen an Allen Fieldhouse as packed as it was the other night, just because that wasn't a reality in 2021. But really, it was less about Bryce's return and hostility or how he performed. He had an all right night, 11 points. Cowboys were pretty much out of it pretty early in the second half. But what stood out to me were the relationships that are still there for the family. They were interacting with parents of former players before the game. Oshai Agbaji's parents, I met them, exchanging hugs and all that. And even Rod Thompson speaking about Bill Self, because that's part of the reason Bryce, I think, was there in the first place at Kansas, was the relationship between Rod and Bill Self that dates back all the way to Tulsa and ORU. And, that doesn't appear to have been strained in any way. So it was an interesting lens to kind of see Bryce's return through with the Thompsons there the other night.
You got to this story in time to catch the back end of it, in that you weren't here writing for the World when Bryce was at Kansas as a freshman. You picked him up after he'd made the decision to move to Stillwater, and you only know him in terms of your beat work as a Cowboy. I say this to preface the question. It may be a little unfair to ask, but I think you could at least lend perspective to how you think, just in terms of this season, how you think it has delivered on any expectations. I mean, the idea was they wanted Bryce, I think, not just to be more of a focal point in what was going on the court to match his talents, but that he also needed a comfortable, fresh start. And I use the word comfortable because it never seemed like he was real comfortable in a Kansas uniform for whatever reason. Do you think, and OSU season has been frustrating, obviously, but just in terms of Bryce Thompson, do you think that the Cowboys have delivered on what the hope would be for the kid in terms of a comfort and that fresh start?
Yeah, I think on the whole, the foundation's been set. Maybe it hasn't been as seamless or easy as some people might have guessed. Maybe it was never going to be that way. You got to factor in the post-Cade Cunningham year and kind of what we've seen from this team accepting the NCAA ban, and then you take that into account as well. It's been probably about as tough a year to come into this program as possible,
right?
Especially at that guard position when you've just got so much that really hasn't gotten figured out. When you have all that talent, Avery Anderson, Bryce Williams, Isaac Likely, but we've got 5 games left on the schedule ahead of tomorrow's game against Kansas State, and I still don't think they've quite figured things out. But I think you've seen the flashes from Bryce Thompson. As far as what he can really offer as that focal point, especially in Big 12 play against good competition. And you've seen him come along on the defensive end. And speaking to him yesterday, he was one of the guys we spoke to at the availability before Kansas State. And he was speaking about, finally feeling settled. He was asked about leadership because Mike Boynton has identified him as a guy who maybe has that Cade Cunningham-like leadership, that not only does he work hard and is in the gym 3 times a day, but maybe eventually he'll be the guy who can pull 4 more guys with him to do that. And Bryce was asked about that, and he said, it takes you a little while. You're settling into a program. You don't just step into a room and start, pulling people in and things like that. So I think he's getting there. And, maybe the expectation when he was a McDonald's All-American or in year one at Kansas was he might not play 3-4 years of college basketball. But I really do think that if he's here next year and the year after, that you'll be looking at a pretty polished, finished product that can be what a lot of people expected when he left high school and when he came to OSU this past spring.
I'm not saying that the Thompson family should plan on locking Bryce into 4 years. I'm not about to make that call. They know what's best ultimately for him, and that would project too far into what might happen next season. I will say this: I've always had a sense that they're on that Rod and the crew around Bryce really want to seize on moments quickly, and I get it. That's what happens when your kid's a high school All-American, comes from a traditional high school powerhouse, has starry-eyed expectations that they didn't self-create. Bryce's ability did, right? I mean, that's he earned those expectations as a player, and yet you don't want to get ahead of the game too much, that you know what I mean, that you don't want to hold on to this was meant just, if it was one and done a year ago, I don't want it to all of a sudden be, what this was never the plan to be in college 4 years. If he can stay and develop and progress. You mentioned Abaji just now at Kansas. Yeah. Abaji wasn't nearly as highly coveted coming out of high school as Thompson was. So that's a little bit of an apples and oranges comparison. But look what 4 years of college and development does for a player like him. I just hope the Thompsons aren't putting up barriers to that even prospect halfway through this kid's career. I think that's where I'm landing.
Yeah, I think there's some feeling still at Kansas that he should have stayed, and that, you watched them the other night, and it's hard to see where Bryce Thompson would have factored in a big way to that team, just the depth they have. But I think there's a feeling there that if he'd hung around, they felt like he had a fit there, and that there'd be a role, and maybe it wouldn't be after one season that he'd find that, but it would have come. And so they made a move, and that's the beauty of the transfer portal nowadays, is when you're not thrilled, you can make that move. And I think now I really do believe that year 3 or 4 for Bryce Thompson, he could be a really, really incredible college basketball player. He has all those tools. The defense is coming. And so it's all there, but he's not the only guy on this team that you might wonder about their future beyond these next 5 games.
Yeah, I don't question at all the decision to transfer to OSU. I think I even wrote the column that's where I'd go. I think when it hadn't been made official, it just made sense for a lot of reasons. So don't fault the transfer. I just hope the Thompsons aren't still on the fastest track, right? Whether that's in Lawrence, Stillwater, or wherever, because I think he's he looks to me like the kind of player that could really settle into to the star we think he has in him, if he just gives the college experience a good long try. So you met the Thompsons away from the actual game, and then afterwards you were there with Mike Boynton when he addressed the loss. And again, with Mike, a lot of times what he says is just as interesting as his coaching and how the game that his team plays turns out. And again, he said some noteworthy things. The thing that caught my attention, Eli, was his description of the atmosphere at Allen, in that fans show up to watch their team play. It's not because of who they're playing against. And that's not a dig, right? I don't think at the OSU base for not coming unless it's a big deal. But I think it does define the difference between a program that takes its basketball seriously, like they do in Stillwater, and one of the 2 or 3 basketball programs that take basketball the most seriously. That's how I read that remark.
Yeah, I think it's exactly right. You put it well. It wasn't necessarily a dig. It was, we're at Kansas, and there's, 5 programs in the country like it, 5, 3, 7, whatever it is. And he referred in the Big 12 to Kansas as the standard bearer. And that's the case in a lot of ways, but certainly you go into that arena, and it's a Monday night, and it's Oklahoma State, which is on paper not an especially massive game, and the place is packed. And you can understand why when a recruit walks in there, I felt it. I was like, yeah, no, I might have committed here too, because it has that, and that's one of the things I think the program still has to work on here is getting Gallagher a full or filled and creating that atmosphere on a consistent basis. You feel what it can be. I mean, Bedlam a couple weeks ago was packed, and it was a great crowd, and a great game came from it. But certainly a different feel, and that was one of the interesting things Mike Boynton had to say afterward was speaking about the atmosphere there at Allen Fieldhouse.
It always brings me back to the comment he made. And again, this predates you. A couple of years ago, when there wasn't even not even half the seats in Gallagher were full, and he walked into a post-game press conference and said, "That's okay. One day soon, this place will be packed." It was sort of a wishful thinking man with a plan and a vision, saying that we'll get it done. And the reason I thought about that after Monday night's comment was that, well, here's a year where that's not happening, because of something that in part happened before the season even began. I think that what blanketed OSU's trajectory, the tournament ban appeal being upheld, but also the unfairness of an opportunity for a base to get behind the program because of a transcendent player that was robbed a year ago when Cade Cunningham played the COVID season in Stillwater. And I always think about, I remember writing about that just in the present because of how miserable the COVID experience was for so many different reasons. But even now I look back on the last year and having a player of Cunningham's caliber and not having fans latch onto it and sort of get Boynton closer to that vision. And it makes me sort of sad all over again.
Yeah, I think, you mentioned what Boynton had to say in that press conference. It'll come. In his defense, 1 year he brings in the future #1 overall pick, and it happens to be a COVID year. And this year, I do think this team had flaws that we weren't able to forecast before the season. But there's no doubt that the postseason ban cast a pall on this season and has had an impact on the team itself and the product. So that's 2 years where I really think he would have had teams that might have brought people here. And for two different reasons, there have been those proverbial wet blankets. And so he's probably going to look to next year. And I think that's one of the questions looking at the offseason with 5 games left is what this team is going to look like. Even Isaac Likely, who I still lean toward him being done, but he's got an extra year, and that the decision there has gone from no way I'm coming back to leaving the door open as recently as last week. But looking at what this team will look like, you're assuming Bryce Thompson's back. You're assuming Musa Cisse's back, but I mean, he may be the most pro ready or most coveted guy on this roster to another college program. And so it'll be what building toward next year can look like for Mike Boynton. And again, putting out a product that people are going to come out to Gallagher to see, because I think, he's deserving of that. I think this program is, but for one reason or another, it hasn't quite happened yet. And a night at Allen Fieldhouse shows you just how far they've got to come.
Did I see this? Was it this week where one of the bracketologists, and it might have been Joe Lenardi over at ESPN, did they have OSU as a bubble? Had they been eligible? Did they put OSU in a bubble scenario? Did I see that?
Yeah, that was pre-Kansas, so that was Monday.
Okay,
Monday during the day, and it's interesting. Mike Boynton yesterday was like, he said, "I'm still a bracketologist myself." As a guy, even though they're not,
right.
He's really into that stuff, and he showed it to his guys after the Kansas game. I think just as a way of showing them that, look, for all the negative this season, and there's been a lot, that they've still got some national respect. Another thing you pointed out was he got a call from a coach from at another school at a conference about playing a non-conference game sometime in these next few weeks, and he feels like that's a testament just to the quality of this team, that a tournament contending team would want to play them with an open date. He wouldn't say who, but those two things, I think he wanted to remind this group that for all of the negativity that swirled around it, that they've done good things. He pointed out that, no matter what and how this ends, no one else to this point is going to be able to say that no other Oklahoma State team has beaten a #1 team on the road. They did that. They beat a pretty talented Texas team that I think we'll be watching in March. And so they've done things. And I think that was his point as they go into these final 5 games, was that he's pretty proud of where they are. And he said he's really enjoyed coaching this group despite all the challenges. But yeah, it was interesting that they opened the week, and now they're below 500 and 5 games to play and a tough 5-game stretch to finish. But I think they would probably be, without the postseason ban, right in the pack with Oklahoma, Iowa State, and Kansas State, who they play tomorrow, chasing a spot in the tournament. It's a real shame that they're not going to get that chance to go to Kansas City with hopes of playing later in March.
I assume the pattern will hold this weekend. They lost in Lawrence, so I assume they'll beat K-State tomorrow and then lose on Monday at home to Baylor. Although you referenced the beating the number one team, that was Baylor in Waco. Still one of the more surprising results, I think, anywhere since conference play began in college basketball. So we'll see. It'd be nice if they broke through and actually won 2 in a row and put more of a feel good, I guess, tone right to this season as it winds down. We'll see what happens. Baseball is happening. Is that right? Do I have that right?
Yeah,
it is. I keep seeing opening day in college baseball, so I guess the Cowboys are involved somewhere.
Well, I mean, I think people are really relishing this opening day because we don't know when we're going to get a Major League Baseball opening day at all.
That's right.
But the Cowboys, it's Friday morning right now as we speak, and they kick off later today at Vanderbilt. Big opening series. It's kind of like, I mean, they've got these hefty expectations. Where else to start other than at Vanderbilt? And so Justin Campbell goes tonight, and Victor Mederos, the Miami transfer who I wrote about in today's Tulsa World, goes tomorrow. And I think this is a pretty good measuring stick. I mean, both Diamond Sports teams, baseball and softball, have come in with massive expectations. And I think for the baseball team to get a start at Vanderbilt as a litmus test and just see where you're at is a pretty interesting place to start.
Yeah, softball's playing as we speak.
They are.
You got up and made breakfast in time to watch the Cowgirls. And where are they, in Florida?
They're in Florida as we speak. I'll give you the play-by-play. Bottom 4. They're up 4-0 on Michigan. 2 outs, 1-1 count. I can't quite tell who's at bat, but single up the middle.
You're after Dave Hunziker's job, is what it sounds like. Listen to you go all Hunziker on us.
You've got to watch out. He's got to watch out.
They're playing Michigan. Well, Michigan's usually the class of the Big Ten, so that's not a bad non-conference notch in OSU's belt if they're able to win that one. They did pretty well, right? Last week, I think they dropped 1 game in their opening weekend. Does that sound right?
They've got they're of the 5 games this weekend, they've got 3 ranked opponents. But they went 4-1 last weekend, lost 1 game to a ranked Duke team, and the tone coming back, you would have thought they went 1-4. Kenny Gajewski was, I think, I would say, like, really disappointed in himself. If you remember, before they went out to Arizona, I mean, it was best team we've assembled in my 7 years here. It was the expectations we're going to be in that final College World Series game. This is the year. All of that, players echoed it. And despite a 4-1 start, I mean, there were some kinks out there in Arizona. They didn't hit very well in the loss to Duke. I think they went 3 for 24 at the plate. And the tone coming back, from him was, I made a mistake, not kind of tamping down the expectations and reminding this group that we haven't done anything yet. They've got all these preseason rankings and accolades, but as he put it, we're not the chasers. There's nothing for anyone, or excuse me, we're not the chase. There's nothing that we have that anybody wants. That Oklahoma State is still chasing the big dogs in front of it. And so this weekend they've got a chance to chase. I mean, they've got ranked opponents. One of them, number 5, Washington. So it was a little bit of a kind of a tone reset, and the players echoed it too, because they were disappointed, and I'm sure they heard it if Kenny Gajewski was disappointed. But an interesting tone coming off that as they head to Florida.
Well, if you've immersed yourself in Allen Fieldhouse, which you have to do if you're going to write sports in this part of the country, you're about to immerse yourself in another cultural tradition, the athletic and cultural, and that's Bedlam wrestling.
Yes.
So are you of the right mind? Are you going to get up and you like chug raw eggs and run 6 miles and try to cut weight or something like that?
Yeah, I'm going to sleep in a foil suit tomorrow night, and I got to cut. During my travels, we did pretty well. We got some barbecue. I had Brahms for the first time, so I've got some weight to cut down to get into my weight class. But
wait, what did you just say? You had what for the first time?
I enjoyed Brahms for the first time in Blackwell, Oklahoma.
You had not had Brahms?
I had the ice cream, courtesy of a gift card, a little gift certificate from the Tulsa World when I was an intern. But this was my first time dining at Brahms, and it was a delightful experience. I think I'll endear myself. Brahms over Whataburger 10 times out of 10.
I'm with you. My kids have the Whataburger glow still from when they went there 1,000 times growing up in Norman. I never caught it. I tried it, just never set in.
That doesn't do it for me like Brahms did. But that said, between that and a little week of vacation, I've got some weight to cut to qualify for my weight class. Spoke to John Smith the other day, and they're in an interesting place, a spot that Oklahoma State wrestling isn't in often. They've dropped 4 of their last 5 duels. Much of that without AJ Ferrari, who John Smith announced this week is done for the season. He just said there was no way he was going to be able to make it back following the car crash in late January. And so they come in. It's the final weekend of the season. They've Bucknell tonight and then Oklahoma on Sunday. And I think it's a big one for the Cowboys. Obviously, take away the rivalry because they've got to get things right before they head to Tulsa for the Big 12 championships. And another little wrinkle here, and John Smith didn't seem too worried about it. But if you recall the last time they met Oklahoma, it ended with a handshake line that resulted in a little bit of a fight. Can't remember the Oklahoma wrestler, but it was AJ Ferrari, and some words exchanged and a little bit of a tussle. And so John Smith was asked, will there be a handshake line? And he said he was going to defer to Oklahoma's coach and see where they feel on Sunday. But he's not too worried there. And he doesn't seem all too worried about his guys. But certainly this week was about injecting some intensity after some disappointing performances.
Been a challenging year for John. I would keep talking about how it's been that way for Mike Boynton. But when you consider the unusual setbacks on the mat, Ferrari's situation, I think the fact that the fan base is a little starved for return to glory, for lack of a better term, and that was hanging over John even before all this went down this year. So yeah, Big 12 meets coming up sooner than we think. I guess that will be in our neighborhood.
Yeah, it will be. And you say that, and I think last weekend they were at Globe Life Field in Arlington where the Rangers play wrestling Iowa. And when they take that kind of bird's eye view of the program and maybe who they've been passed up by, they look to Penn State, they look to Iowa. And I think last weekend was another example of that. In a really packed house, it seemed like quite an event. You had all the it was a who's who. You had Mike Gundy there, you had Casey Schrum, Chad Weiberg, and a disappointing performance against kind of one of those blue bloods in wrestling that Oklahoma State stands among, but right now maybe a step behind.
You threw Gundy into the conversation. It feels like we're committing some kind of a crime, not mentioning football in this thing. Something this is the first time we've ever not led with football. We didn't even mention it. Did we leave something out?
It's not it's the rare week, maybe the first week since I've gotten here, that there has not been some football news in one way, shape, or form.
Okay.
I can report this real hard fact with absolute certainty that it sounds like the week after spring break, which will be like mid-March, they plan to kick off spring camp. So they may be behind some other schools, but that's about the only information we have there. And I mentioned this to you before, that an interesting tidbit yesterday is that Oklahoma State has joined kind of this licensing group that's going to be able to sell player jerseys, customizable player jerseys. So you can get a Spencer Sanders on your back, you get a Brandon Presley on your back at the team store, with the players compensated for those sales in some way. And that's, we don't know what that looks like completely and how it relates in this whole new sphere of NIL, but you put your thumb up and it's a good thing, because I can promise you right now, before this was in effect, you can go into the team store. There's probably a number 3 jersey and maybe an 80 jersey with no name on it. But those numbers are there for a reason. So that's a positive. And I think another kind of space to watch in this whole NIL player compensation thing as how players deal with it.
Well, that's the more, you bring this up. That's where we thought this was, I think, headed when the legislation finally got knocked through, was things like that, where you were literally wearing the kid's jersey. Yeah. And the school was working around the direct identification, or not in some cases.
Yeah.
Or the fan was stitching the name on in case anyone had any doubts that was, that's, wonder what number 3 he's wearing to the OSU football. So
exactly.
Anyway, getting that revenue to the actual player was the whole idea. The stuff that's blown, of course, it's just blown sky high, is the collectives, right? And the donor groups that are being amassed to try to set new bars as to what the high school players and even current players on campus, college campus, can make, right? What was it? The David Oven guy you might,
Yeah.
old friend on the OU beat who's now at the Athletic and writing some really great work for them with his look inside what they're doing specifically at Tennessee, right? Donors, boosters, fans sort of taking control of name, image, and likeness, I think is what's happening here. And maybe everyone should have seen it coming. Your example with what's going on at OSU regarding jerseys / memorabilia, I think what everyone maybe had in mind.
And I'll put one word to it: harmless.
Right.
Talk all about the big schools and what they might be doing, and A&M or Texas, but stuff like this, man,
yeah.
Like it is disappointing it's taken this long, because I think there's a lot of guys who could have made some money off of, and I don't know how much. We don't know how much they'll make. And one interesting note is players do have to opt into this, and I don't know what they would gain by not doing it. But that's an interesting component here. If something like this impacts other NIL deals a player could have, or what else,
right?
It kind of just falls into this another interesting pathway in the whole NIL player compensation field.
Also, should put an end to the silliness about, well, he can make money off NIL, but it better not be like a logo from the university,
right?
Which is one of the most hypocritical offshoots of the original intent. I mean, all these. There should probably be some guardrails. We know that based on what's happening with regard to, free agency, basically. But that was one of the more, useless all along. And hopefully that day came and has now gone forever. And folks realize how silly it was to restrict NIL compensation that way, just because there's an OSU logo or Pistol Pete shows up on the jersey. So anyway, end of sermon. Well, enjoy Bedlam and the hoops and. Whatever else you do with your weekend, Eli. It's good to see you again.
Weekend up here in Stillwater, sports-wise, so it'll be exciting.
We'll talk to everyone next week. Again, we've got weekly podcasts / videos on the OSU, OU, TU, and high school beats for your continued consumption. You guys stay warm, take care, and we'll talk to you next week.